everyone, this is a long-awaited video. Thank you so much for your patience and Happy New Year. I wish you all the best for 2026, and no matter whether you're into New Year's resolutions or not, I wish you lots of joy and that you're going to achieve anything you set your mind on. In this video, I want to uncover where the name for the popular Japanese street fashion style Lolita is coming from, and I want to put out a disclaimer as I'm going to present my findings based on my research and the literature I've read. So please let me know down in the comments if you come to a different conclusion or if you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share. I also want to give a trigger warning as we're going to touch on some more difficult topics. So if this is something you can't deal with right now, I would recommend to skip this video. I'm also going to expect that you have some basic understanding of Harajuku, Kawaii fashion, and just Japanese alternative fashion in general, but I'm going to leave some links down below for you to read up on if you're interested. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Whilst we know that Lolita fashion dates back to the 1970s, I argue that it has close connections to Japanese feminine subcultures from the late 19th and early 20th century. Understanding the mindset and struggles of girls at that time will help us understand where the name for EGL comes from. So let's start at the beginning, and of course it starts with patriarchy. No one would have seen that coming. Just as a side note, I'm going to refer to the fashion style as EGL moving forward, just to avoid any potential flags from YouTube later on. Thank you so much for your understanding. Japan lived closed off from other countries in isolation for quite some time and only first opened their borders to foreign influences during the Meiji era. At that time, Japan looked up to the West for inspiration, for modernization, and implemented a Western school education system, including boarding schools. Girls were sent to these girls-only boarding schools to learn traits deemed as feminine, such as being obedient, behaving in a very demure way, or being innocent. Whilst the goal was to train these girls in isolation to become perfect wives for their husbands later on, this isolation created some sort of loophole for these girls to grow up and explore their own interests on their own terms without the interference of a male authority figure such as a brother, father, or potential husband. This was the start of a feminine-oriented subculture, which was referred to as shoujo subculture in a lot of the literature that I've read. In this subculture, girls started to focus on their own interests and their own girlhood in order to escape the pressure of becoming perfect wives. Common themes in the shoujo subculture included cuteness, innocence, dreaminess, which might not sound rebellious at first, but it helped girls to act autonomously by exploring their own interests and identities that felt uniquely theirs. In a way, Japan's patriarchy created a generation of silent rebels rather than girls who were keen on becoming someone else's wives due to the pressure of society and man's desires. What started with these rebels a very long time ago became a full-on commercial hit in the 1970s. Girls of the shoujo subculture focused especially on their own femininity, cute items such as toys, lace or ribbons, or nicely decorated food and dolls, for example. In 1972, high school girls started to cutify their handwriting with rounded characters, English words, hearts and stars around the characters, and a Western way of writing and reading. And Sanrio picked up on that. They started using this kind of cute writing in their own products, which turned girls in the shoujo subculture into to loyal Sanrio customers. What followed were marketing campaigns of kawaii products targeted to girls, high school girls, and young women. And due to their big purchasing power and a focus of using their own money solely on themselves and for their own interests, these girls were able to influence Japanese pop culture, such as music, manga, and fashion, with the power of their wallets. A big example of this is The Rose of Versailles, a manga series that was especially popular amongst girls within that subculture due to its aesthetic, language, and focus on platonic relationships. This type of sexual abstinence between partners resonated immensely with girls within the shoujo subculture who were not dreaming about their roles as wives, but about their own girlhood and femininity. In the case of The Rose of Versailles, the manga led to a glorification and romanticization of the French Rococo era and a general heightened interest in historic French culture amongst girls within that subculture. All of this combined, the subculture's huge influence on Japanese pop culture, kawaii items that were now readily available to purchase, and the rise in popularity of the French Rococo during a time of Japan's economic boom resulted in the creation of several very popular Japanese fashion brands such as Milk, Pink House, and Shirley Temple, which were all established in the 1970s. I'm not delving into the history of Harajuku here, as this video would end up getting a bit too long then, but Harajuku was thriving at that time as well, which allowed for more out-of-the-box designers to establish themselves. Milk or Pink House, which focused on more feminine, cute aesthetics, as well as a glorified version of the French Rococo, enabled girls of the shoujo subculture to basically dress in their own feminine aesthetic that they had only been able to consume in the form of products up to that point. I argue that EGL is the personification of the autonomous mindset of girls within the shoujo subculture of that time and a peak in their fashion aesthetic. Let me get into this now and how that's all related to the name of the fashion. In the 1970s, Olive magazine was a popular magazine for girls at that time. Olive featured shoujo brands such as Pink House or Milk and taught girls how to dress, which films, music, or books to consume, and how to cutify their rooms, for example. The goal here was to teach girls an idealized version of a feminine and elegant lady, inspired by a glorified French aesthetic, similar to the Rose of Versailles. On top of that, some hobbies Olive promoted included watching classical French movies, afternoon tea, and baking. Later on, in 1988, Akinori Isobe, who worked for a former designer of Milk, founded his own brand, Baby the Stars Shine Bright, which obviously is known as the EGL brand, and even today still stands as one of the biggest. The connection here should be clear now. There's a clear thread from the beginnings of the shoujo subculture all the way to the beginnings of EGL fashion. So let me give you a quick summary. The shoujo subculture came from a patriarchal ideology forced onto girls in the Meiji era. However, these girls appropriated this ideology and made it their own, focusing on childhood, girlhood, deep female connections, femininity, and abstaining from desires. Over the decades, this fixation on femininity and cuteness led to publications of products such as the Rose of Versailles, Olive, and kawaii products targeted to young women and high school girls. The huge purchasing power of these girls made their influence on pop culture really big and grew all of these aspects within their own subculture, which later led to the establishment of brands such as Milk and Pink House, who created fashion for shoujo girls that were inspired by femininity, cuteness, a romanticized version of the French Rococo, which then later resulted in the first EGL brands such as Baby the Starshine Bright. On top of that, there are a lot of clear similarities between shoujo subculture and EGL, such as an interest in French Rococo, kawaii products, femininity, a focus on dressing for yourself, a focus on dressing cute rather than sexy, and quite stereotypical feminine interests and hobbies such as baking or afternoon tea. Think of all of the EGL meetups that have afternoon tea, for example, and so on. Another great example to make this connection even clearer is Momoko from Kamikaze Girls. She's wearing EGL, but she's portrayed in a way that fully aligns with the mindset and lifestyle of the shoujo subculture. She's dreamy, spends money on herself only, likes tea and sweets, is into high feminine clothing, dreams about living in a romanticized version of France, is a bit aloof and not really interested in finding a partner. The difference here is that EGL offers more of a niche subculture, so a closer community feeling that can give girls a better sense of stability or even lead to opportunities, be it close friendships in mostly female-only spaces, model or design opportunities, or an even greater opportunity to focus on one's own identity. Now that we've established that connection, we can discuss where the names coming from. So how does knowing all of this help us understand why Lolita Fashion is called the way it is? Let's start at why the name is so controversial. A Western definition of the name is a premature girl, sexually active, or a young woman who is dependent. From a Western perspective, hearing that name in connection to the fashion makes it almost sound like a if you don't know any better. The name Lolita is a short form of the name Dolores, which is the name of the protagonist of the novel Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov in 1955. The novel focuses on a middle-aged man who feels sexually attracted to his 12-year-old stepdaughter, and the novel clearly depicts that this desire only comes from the man, and his stepdaughter Dolores does not reciprocate it. However, the movie version turned this completely upside down, making Dolores react to the man's desire with flirtations and clearly demonstrating her own desires. Hence, the negative connotation of the name. If you think of EGL's connection to themes such as girlhood, femininity, and cuteness, which are traits vastly associated with children here in the West, you can see why there might be a bit of friction or misunderstanding when it comes to outsiders hearing the name of the fashion. However, looking at everything that we've learned today with the mindset of shoujo girls within the shoujo subculture, as well as EGL's clear connection to that subculture and mindset, it really contradicts that Western definition of the name. The fashion is purposefully avoiding nudity and is known for prioritizing female connections over sexual desires, the opposite of Dolores' movie depiction. In all honesty, a lot of designers who work in the EGL industry don't really know where the name comes from. So let's do some theorizing, shall we? I see two distinct reasons for a possible explanation of the name. Number one, the popularity of English names within the shoujo subculture and the general Japanese pop culture. English or foreign words have a huge social recognition in Japan. Think of all of these brands we've just talked about: Milk, Pink House, Shirley Temple, Baby the Starshine Bright, alongside so many other Harajuku brands such as Ankh Rouge, Dear My Love, Alice and the Pirates, Angelic Pretty, Innocent World, Swim Up, Bubbles, AC/DC Rag, the list goes on. Names such as Alice or Lolita might just resonate with a Japanese audience with no negative connotations attached. Number 2 is a bit more in-depth, and I think it's down to cultural differences and the topic in Vladimir Nabokov's novel can be interpreted. Take the Tale of Genji, for example. This famous Japanese literature from the 11th century revolves around a young girl named Murasaki no Ue, who was brought into the household of the older Prince Genji at the age of 10 to grow up to become his wife. The novel focuses on her becoming his wife eventually, but along the way she broke out of Genji's traditional expectations and made the decision herself, which in turn destroyed Genji's expectations of her and her traditional role. Murasaki no Ue's actions can be interpreted as autonomous, as she made the decision herself to marry Genji in the end, rather than giving in to her destiny unwillingly. Of course, looking at this novel now from a 2026 point of view, you can argue that her so-called autonomous decision to marry Genji was still made under the pressure of a patriarchal society, making you wonder if she ever had the opportunity to actually make up her own mind by herself. But this is a can of worms I don't want to open in this video. Moving on, another famous example in Japanese literature is Chijin no Ai from 1925, which focuses on Joji, a 28-year-old man who lets Naomi, a 15-year-old girl, move in with him to train her to become his wife. The novel ends with Naomi entering a relationship with Joji out of her own free will, showing that she grew up to become a woman who can make her own decisions based on her own desires. Again, this is the general interpretation of that novel, but I fully align with anyone who feels a bit icky with these topics, resolutions, and interpretations. Both novels depict a similar plot and come to similar conclusions, but instead of focusing on a tragedy, the novels focus on the development of the female protagonist and how she deals with her situation. I argue that Vladimir Nabokov's novel can be interpreted in a similar light. Instead of focusing on the tragedy, a Japanese audience could have focused more on Dolores herself and how she deals with the situation she's in. Dolores, who deals with unwanted male desires at a very young age, is in the same position as girls within the shoujo subculture, which later on resulted in EGL, who deal with unwanted pressure and expectations of being a woman in a male-dominated society. Dolores could have been seen as someone these girls can empathize with, someone who's in the same boat, who wants to escape the role or destiny they found themselves in, and therefore decide to make their own proactive decisions. In all honesty, I don't think we will ever find out the exact truth on why the fashion is called the way it is, but I do believe the answer lies somewhere amongst all our findings. I'm pretty sure the name itself just really sounded like a nice sounding name at that time and got picked up without any negative connotations attached. I also believe that EGL fashion, with its strong connections to and roots in shoujo subculture, shares a similar mindset on focusing on one's own femininity, female friendships, and avoidance of male desires. At least in overall themes, I'm not saying that people wearing EGL are not dating. That's not what I'm saying at all. But for example, if you look at promotional material, at magazines, at the brands, it's very clear that the focus is on friendship, on yourself, yourself, on your own identity, you barely see anything related to couples, for example. And to be fair, if you do, it's usually female presenting people. So there is this clear avoidance of portraying male desire within any EGL material. Maybe at the time where EGL fashion was at its beginnings, some girls within the shoujo subculture who were wearing milk or pink house, reading The Rose of Versailles, stumbled across Vladimir Nabokov's novel, empathized with Dolores in the way we just theorized, really liked the name, and just decided to call their fashion that way. Who knows? So this is where all my research ends, and where now everything is left up to our interpretation. But I do believe we're onto something. It's really interesting how these topics are such a common theme in Japanese literature, and how the focus always lies on the apparently autonomous choice of the female protagonist. I also read that Vladimir Nabokov's novel is actually not as widespread in Japan as it is here in the West. So I could really imagine that Dolores' depiction in the novels resonated with some girls in Japan who just saw themselves in her to some extent without knowing the huge backlash the movie adaptation had here in the West. And they probably also just really liked the name and then decide to call their fashion that way. I could really see that be the reason or the start, and then other people just joining in because the name just sounded nice. And then over time, that name just stuck around and started to be associated with EGL fashion the way it looks today. If you made it all the way to here, thank you so much for watching. This was a passion video to make, so it would mean a lot to me if you could share this video with someone you think might be interested in this topic, if you could give it a like. And I'm also really keen to hear your thoughts on this entire topic. If you have any other opinions, if you drew any other conclusions, if you know anything else that I didn't find in my research, I'm really interested to know and to hear what you have to say. So as always, let's have a nice conversation in the comments, be respectful. We're all just trying to learn together. And again, I wish you a great start to the new year. Make sure to focus on yourself. Make sure to focus on the small things that bring you happiness. And yeah, see you in the next video. Thank you so much. Bye bye.